All right. There we go. Okay, all right. I don't see any privilege of the floor, so we're gonna move on. And so the minutes, which I did send out, from 2 meetings ago and, last meeting and the meeting prior to that. Let's deal with the June 18th meeting first. Any further comments, adjustments, corrections, or are they fine?
Fine.
Okay. And then the June 16th meeting, same question.
July 16th,
July 16th, sorry, July 16th.
fine.
Okay, all right, those are approved and we'll get final on their website presence now. Okay, Michelle, what to report from what the town board has been up to and working on and what's coming up?
Well, you should know that, we had a public hearing for the subdivision law. Nobody came and offered any questions or suggestions.
Wow.
Did you get anything in writing?
So, Don Barber did send us a few comments, which we will discuss tomorrow night.
Okay.
So other than that, I mentioned, to the rest of the board that you're working on the adult use law and, the trailer park law, right?
Right, correct.
And they were wondering if you thought perhaps the flood, wait, let me get the exact. The flood damage prevention local law, whether that should get a second look.
Oh,
I need someone to, you're up. It circled around to you again. Okay, so the question is about the flood damage prevention law?
Yeah, that maybe that should be next on the roster for getting a second look.
Okay, good. It's something I've brought to Mark a couple times. I think it's a great idea. And was there any particular concerns about that law brought forward that the town board was wondering about?
No, not that I remember, just that might be a good thing to look at. I guess, considering where some of the building's been happening, along 6 Mile Creek and also general issues with potential flooding in town and stuff.
Okay. All right, sounds good. I think that will probably be then the next thing up. I think it's probably on the list we sent you guys. It's been on my radar for a bit.
Okay.
And in particular, and Nan made this point, it's been discussed before. The flood damage prevention law is exactly what it says. It's designed to prevent damage due to flooding, typically to buildings or to, so they say, if you're in a flood zone, you have to put your heater up a certain watch or, so it's building standards. And what it doesn't necessarily do is protect the watershed in the event of flooding. And I think that would probably be the key thing to maybe incorporate, but again, if town board has any other feedback on what they think are maybe weaknesses or things that need to be shorn up. But, I don't think there's anything in there that says, if you live in a flood zone, you can't store oil barrels, on the ground or things like that. So there might be, that's the sort of thing that I think for sure would need to be upgraded as my thinking. So. Okay, great. Duly noted.
So yeah, there's nothing. So other than that, I think, it's tomorrow night will be further discussion of the proposed subdivision law.
Okay. And what I will say, the reason I put seeker on the list and stuff is that I know you guys are doing a seeker process for that law, because that has to happen. And we and other town committees are officially interested parties. But I talked to Mark today and looks like there's nothing actually you guys need us to do on the seeker portion. You guys are handling all that yourselves. Fine. I have no particular need for us to be involved in that process. But if anybody else in the planning board decides they want something different, then we can add our 2 cents on the seeker.
I don't have a need to do that.
Okay, yeah, no, not as, you know, we can think about it overnight, but anyway, yeah, no, I think it's. I think it's basically sort of not quite pro forma, but you know, it'd be complete to include us on the list of. Not, you know, the town board, the lead agency, and then the review board, and we, and somebody else, I think are the interested parties. Interested agencies. Okay, so that was on the agenda because I thought potentially we had to discuss it, but we don't. So let's move on to the adult use law. So Adam and I have done some poking around on that law and related things. We both, mostly Adam have looked at some other town laws in Tompkins County. And I sent out a table relevant to that we'll discuss in a minute. And I also sent out a link to a Department of State document, sort of giving the legal framework within which these sort of laws can be enacted. And again, this is, we do have a law, it is legal, but I did just want to make sure, since we were not involved in this at the time, to make sure we're all up to speed on what is going on. So, you know, there's a First Amendment in this country, and so when you try to limit what can be said or done or whatever, then you potentially run afoul of the First Amendment. So there have been court cases, some settled by the Supreme Court, some settled by courts in New York State, that sort of delineate what towns and municipalities can and can't do. So basically, it probably, so hinges on the word obscene. So things that are obscene can certainly be prohibited. But what we are dealing with is non-obscene content that is not nevertheless sexually related. So and obscene is a you know, one of those words someone says, you know, I know it when I see it, but the laws typically clearly delineate what the law covers in terms of exposure of the human body and other things like that. So there's a whole section usually that, you know, they're usually pretty brief, but that's what the non-obscene part is clearly delineated in the law. Basically, normally towns can do a lot of stuff, but because of the First Amendment, it says that when a municipal's regulations impinge on adult businesses' freedom of expression, they lose the presumption of constitutionality that normally applies to zoning regulations, and the burden shifts to the local governments to justify the restrictions. Hence, a lot of these laws start off with something justifying why they're doing what they're doing. So it says prior to adopting, you know, a zoning law related to adult use, a local government must show that it conducted or relied upon planning studies that showed the need to protect neighborhoods from the harmful secondary effects of adult businesses. So if you look at Caroline's law, you will notice right up front, there's a paragraph that says in 1998, the town board appointed a committee that looked into this matter and brought forth studies, and the town board now adopts that report, and based on that is passing this law. I don't know what you saw, Adam, but what I saw is some of the more recent laws paid pretty short shrift to that. It's now sort of like, given that there are harmful second effects, we're passing this law. And so
So more recent laws meaning in other towns?
Yeah, like town of Lansing,
Yeah.
town of Danby, I think all these have revised. So it looks to me like there was a flurry of stuff in the late 90s. Everyone's laws are pretty similar, all passed around the same time, but then some have been updated and revised since then. So it may be that it is so well established now that, you know, having specific citation of we did a study, we know it has harmful effects is no longer necessary. It is it's in our current law, and that's what it is. And typically jurisdictions do one of two things when they're trying to limit adult entertainment businesses, as these are often called. And it often has to do with the distance. So one thing you can do is specify you can only be in this part of town. And we need not do that with our zoning law. But other towns have not said that. They simply said, businesses that do this have to be far apart from each other, like 1,000 feet more from each other. With the assumption being that you don't want to create a bad section of town, essentially, a Skid Row effect, it's called. So in essence, you can do some of both, or you can have protective zones around particular uses. Typically, when there are children present, it's been found constitutional to say you can't be within X feet. So that's the basic thing. And the only other sort of
So
legal,
can I just
yes,
ask? a question?
absolutely.
So the ones where, the laws of this type that limit the adult entertainment use to a specific area of town, is that, without zoning too? Like, can
I
towns
think-
that do not have zoning, they can do that?
I don't know the answer for sure. I think the answer is no. Because you'd have to have a way of saying. So I think, again, what Caroline had before that was simply buffer distances from
Right.
things, but not a spot.
Okay.
Interesting question, whether you could somehow do that, but I don't know.
Okay.
But the first court case, do I actually have it on here? Okay.
Town of Ulysses actually specifies which zoning districts it can't be near.
Well, Caroline's zoning law says it can be in the commercial district.
Right, but in addition, sometimes they say, and you have to be this far away from the boundary of
Oh,
these other
yeah,
zoning
another-
districts.
Yeah.
So there's all these different, layers, so, yeah, no, actually, every use I've seen where they restrict it to an area of town has zoning.
Has zoning, yeah.
So there's, the Supreme Court set up a certain set of tests that a law has to, abide by to make sure it's constitutional. New York State, in some court cases, established a 3-part test from a 4-part test. Again, I don't think we have to worry too much about those details, but they're there, and these laws in the towns are all very similar. They've all been tested. I think they're all fine. But the main point I want to bring out about that, all that stuff, is that one of the things they say is they must be allowed somewhere. So a town cannot say you may not have an adult entertainment business anywhere in our town. So that has been found to not, be constitutional. And so that, I think, is just important for us to understand, because the question is, yeah, why not just say no? But you can't just say no everywhere. So given that, we are down to where should it be allowed, and should they be separated from each other or not, and how far should they be from places where kids are, and which is basically what the law has right now. Given that we now have zoning and it's restricted to the commercial zone.
Which has a school and a church.
Which has a school and church in it, so our distances are.
Wow, I didn't think about that part.
Yeah, so it's good, and we have a very mixed. Commercial district, right? It's basically a few, there's houses there too, all kinds of stuff. And there's no necessarily, houses will always be allowed there. You could put a new house in, or you could, so. It makes sense to have these other buffers in too. It's like some other places where, like, Ithaca. Has 2 light industrial zones. Of their 3 or 4 light industrial zones, 2 of them are allowed to have this. Their condition is, if it's a light industrial zone that touches on a state highway, which means Route 13, and there's 2 spots there. Other than it's relatively unfettered, though I think they still have like a 280-foot distance from a residence. I'm not sure.
And we have currently 1,000.
Yeah, so pulling out the table now, and then I'm gonna pass it on to
And
Adam.
so what's the distance between Caroline School and the church?
Yeah,
How many
I-
thousands of feet is that?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think, from a constitutional perspective, I don't think that's a problem. As in, by putting this distance on, you've now eliminated a third of that district you said it could be in. If we eliminate all of the district, then that would be an issue.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Is functionally, is
right.
there, if we stuck with 1,000 in either direction, in any direction.
I think it'd be all right. I mean, from there, I'm just looking at Google Maps, they could be a little 1,000-foot,
right.
and that brings you to basically to Thomas Road.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, so that's not too
Yeah, so
bad.
that-
Otherwise, I would say we should generate a map, because it's a
Okay.
good question.
Yeah.
Okay. So looking at the table I sent out, and had my act together, Michelle, I'd now be sharing this on screen because of all our big Zoom audience out there could see it, but I don't, you know.
I looked at the table.
Okay, great. So in general, and as I noted in the email, you know, Caroline's up at the top level. Now, I will say the first court case that went to the Supreme Court, the town was imposing 1,000-foot buffer around things like schools and churches and houses and stuff like that. So we're right in line with that. And if there was some hue and cry in the community that, why is that, or I want them smaller, I think we could look into it, but personally, this is what it's been.
Mhm.
I'm not advocating that we change anything, Adam, you do anything?
No,
And so I think the distances in our law are okay to keep as is. That was one of the questions I tasked Adam myself with is, you know, how do we follow what's going on? Do these need to be revised? I did.
So just, I'm just looking at your table of how you're breaking out the separation distances. So it's 1,000 feet from a residential dwelling,
Mhm.
from a school, from a religious
And
facility.
I would say, and I would say like the religious facility, I mean, many of these things will have other things, like sometimes they'll say school, government institution, or something. So this is a shorthand.
Right, no,
Because
I'm just wondering though, if we really do keep from a residential dwelling, from a school, from a religious facility, all of those need to be 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
How, you know, like
Yeah.
how wide is the commercial district? Because we have
Right,
residential houses,
okay, I think
like
that's a
on the
good,
corner of Thomas Road.
Yeah.
yeah, no.
You know,
That's an
I
excellent
don't
question.
know if one could fit in there.
Right, so commercial district, we will, and I'm putting up, we put nothing to that, I think you're right, that needs to be mapped, basically, we need to take a look at that question.
Yeah.
because we might be accidentally outlawing it.
Right, yeah.
And given that it is now restricted to just that one section of town,
Maybe.
then perhaps some of these distances could be smaller.
And maybe that's why some of the towns did those. You know, what was it? A couple of the towns, they have definitely different distances for those different things, which I thought was weird, but now thinking more about it, they may have a good reason to do that because of this, for not accidentally outlawing it.
Yeah, Lansing went 1,000 feet across the board as well, but I don't remember what zone or zones they allow it in. I think, because I look at so many, like the garage, you know, you needed two, you know.
Well, I have their appendix up right now.
Yeah, but that's not gonna necessarily tell us what zones it's allowed
You
in.
mean, yeah, zoning zones.
Yeah, I've got it. All right, so I think it's an excellent question, Barb, so we should make sure, you know, what impact that has on that district. And potentially change things based on that. The other thing I'll bring up is
Wait,
that.
actually, Lansing does say shall be permitted in a rural agricultural district
Okay.
only.
Thought I'd look at that, right? So they're doing, right, so they have a large part of their town probably like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that bears some careful looking at.
Mhm.
The other things I think it is worth discussing. So Caroline's law includes a separation distance from a place licensed to sell alcohol, basically a half mile. As is Dryden, as is Newfield, but not other towns. And that is, I think, you know, an arguable question. I don't. I guess I'm agnostic, but you know, and there aren't places licensed to sell alcohol in that commercial district now. I mean, Celebration serves them, I don't think it sells them, but you know, that could change, right? That's the whole point.
Yeah, I don't know that that's true. I think during the pandemic, weren't they like doing to-go meals?
They
and
were.
I thought alcohol was involved in that.
Well, again, they certainly could, or some other business could open up. What I was trying to say a minute ago. So I did poke around, because again, you know, these numbers are in here, but I did some web searching, like what are deemed to be good distances,
Right.
and I found squat. Now, it wasn't an exhaustive search, But I was looking to find some studies, you figure some academic somewhere has said, I did find one study in New York City that found actually that sexual violence crimes went down slightly in the neighborhoods of these adult entertainment establishments, with the presumption being that the potential offenders were busy inside rather than outside committing offenses. Be that as may, the numbers do go around a lot on these tables. And I couldn't find any rhyme or reason out there in the world as to what they ought to be.
Mhm.
So, I guess we should be reasonable in not precluding them throughout that district.
I think the reason why some of them are is because of what we just kind of discovered. If you if you just do a blanket across, you may
Yeah.
make it impossible to make one of these.
Yeah, so it makes sense that some of these towns with zoning, that maybe, you look at which zones they allow it in. So Groton, for example, I know does have it fairly, like all their residential zones, it's not allowed in. It's just one sort of like medium commercial district or something. And so that may be why some of their distances are smaller, just because, again, otherwise you wind up wiping out the entire district, so.
Right.
Okay, good point. That we'll do some geography.
Yep.
So again, potentially, a half mile from a place to alcohol, if someplace opens up that sells alcohol, that would get rid of a lot of that commercial district.
Yeah.
And that's on the existing law now.
Yes, that's what it says right now.
Yeah.
So that would be also one. The other thing that I found a bit curious is that Caroline's law had a distance from the town boundary, that they had to be at least 500 feet from the town boundary.
Mhm.
We're the only town that has that in there. I'm tempted to delete that in part because it seems a bit arbitrary, for all we know, the district next to it in the town there has one, right? Or is it allowed, or so, it's hard to know a good rationale. I think maybe it's trying to be a good neighbor or something, but,
Is the only town within the commercial zone though that close would be town of Dryden on.
every time drive, yeah. And to be honest, I don't know if, again, districts can change. I don't know if that district, I think it probably does not encompass a boundary currently. So by being in that zone, it probably is away from that border anyway, but again, I wouldn't want to say, oh, we could get rid of this for that reason, because that zone may change, right?
Mhm.
Right.
But anyway, it does seem like, that's potentially something. All right, so that is one aspect, is the distances, so, good thanks, Barb. The other has to do with, sort of what's covered, which has three parts, which is what are the sort of, establishments. The other is what are the physical activities, and the other is what are the, what they call them, sexually, they say the specified sexual activities and the specified anatomical areas that trigger things. I think, tell me if you find that every single town, and I've even looked outside the state, has exactly the same specified sexual activities and specified anatomical areas.
Mhm.
I think someone came up with a nice set. We're all happy with it, we use it.
Yep.
What is a bit different, though, are sometimes some of the, how the businesses are worded. So what's your thinking? You haven't looked at a lot of these things on the uses, the adult entertainment businesses, et cetera.
Different businesses.
Definitions we should use.
The only one that I feel like some of them seem, even though like, I look at Lansing one kind of the most, because it seems to be the most in-depth.
Mhm.
And looking at that, it still doesn't necessarily say what I think would be probably the only business that would really pop up in Caroline would be more of an internet based. So it doesn't necessarily say that, it just says video store, motion picture, but it doesn't, it's a theater.
Right.
So I don't know if.
So when you say internet place, what would it be? Would it be like stalls where you could go in there?
No, I'm
and-
thinking like more of a studio where they record it and put it out on the internet. I don't know if that even qualifies as the same. I don't know. But that's probably something that the internet that is probably biggest in the adult industry right now.
Okay,
Something like OnlyFans, for instance.
I don't know what that is. I'm probably the wrong generation.
It's a subscription-based individual, sort of like, I don't even know how to explain it other than. It's everyone who's on that is their own business and they record themselves doing things. And then they put it out there for subscription based.
Okay, but people must be doing their own house. I mean, is there a reason for there to be a building somewhere for this?
No, but again, it's a business and it's an adult entertainment business, but I don't know how that would be.
Yeah, but if it's like, if someone's doing it out of their own home, for example,
Yes,
that would be a home business.
okay, so that's probably likely what it would be.
Yeah, so, yeah, so I think that will, again, I think that, and again. I think it would be difficult to argue a community impact on that gives the town a reason to regulate the activity.
Got it.
Because it's, what you're doing behind closed doors.
Then I think it does, because it says there is filmed motion pictures, so. It just never specifically said anything about internet based.
Yeah. And I too agree, so, in our definitions. I'm basically, would recommend we do like a substitute with Lansing's. It's not that ours are terrible. But the one thing I think I mentioned in the very first meeting, it talks about, if a massage parlor has opposite sex, it's covered, but if it's like single sex, it seems to be fined by this law, which didn't seem to make sense to me. But also I just think that again, Lansing has sort of upgraded and worked on the definitions a bit. I did find, again, Danby's definitions are word for word the same as Lansing's, except they also have a category of peep show. Which for some reason, Lansing didn't have. And then I found something from another town, not even in New York, I don't even know where it is, it's Plainfield, I have no idea what state it's in. I just, one of those things you happen to hit a thing on the web, and I took a look. And again, a lot of definitions are pretty similar, the same, it's a bit more
I
thorough.
can see your internet history now.
Yeah, I know. My wife's like, "What is
It's
this?"
a dangerous thing to look up.
They have, they have adult bookstore, adult arcade, adult cabaret, adult motion picture theater, adult entertainment.
I don't know about that. I feel like escort agency and sexual encounter centers, that almost sounds illegal, but.
Right, well, yeah, so they have also escort service, so their escort service is, anyone who provides for a fee. Well, so an escort means a person who, for a fee, agrees to accompany another person to or about social affairs, entertainments, or places of amusement.
Okay.
Et cetera. So, an escort, of course, doesn't have to be.
Right, but Lansing does say something a little bit more. They say where sexual services are provided to clientele.
Yeah, so, I would think that would skirt on what is
Yeah.
legal at all. but-
That's what I mean, because later they do say. Thought they said it. I think they said prostitution is illegal.
Yeah, because prostitution is illegal, so, don't be. Yeah,
Right there. E6, knowingly allow prostitution or sexually oriented business premises as defined herein.
yeah. Huh, yeah, because that's why, so. Again, this other town wanted to regulate escort services. I think because of their tendency to provide sexual services, but, they don't mention that.
Right,
Yeah, so I know that's something that, I don't know.
it's weird that Lansing actually mentions it and
Yeah,
then says it's illegal later.
okay, so,
So which one, that verbiage you just used sounded better than Lansing's.
yeah. Well, if we really want to, have that covered by the law, which is, because if you really are providing simply a companion to a businessman who simply doesn't really want someone to chat with him while he's at a bar.
Right.
And then say goodnight, that's one thing, right? And I don't know if we need to be concerned about that, so.
Probably more home business anyways.
Okay, so I've put an arrow to flag that, we should think more about whether to delete that line or how to handle something like an escort agency. What I think we need to do, and I cleared this with Mark today, is, oh, we haven't talked about the fines yet, so we'll get to that. Is, I think I'm gonna write a note to town lawyer and ask him a few questions, about things, and one was, I assume he's happy with the Lansing definitions, because he's their town lawyer too. But I wanna make sure, because sometimes towns pass things over the objections to their lawyer.
What, was he the lawyer when that was
It was
passed?
only a few years ago, so the answer is yes. It was like 2020, and he's been for quite a while. I don't know when he started, but. The other was, so the questions I have, for Guy. One is about the, essentially that verbiage that justifies the law. Does that need to stay in? It's not, no harm, no foul either way, but again, we have to appeal to the fact that there was this study done 20 years ago. And I don't know if that staleness becomes an issue, or we can just say, yeah, it's okay. So that was one question I have for him. Another, I think, would be about this escort agency versus a prostitute. What differentiates that? Why, because it's sexual service you provide, that sounds like a prostitute, and that's not legal, so why is that in there? I said the general question was, substitute Lansing for Caroline deaths. Again, whether he's generally happy with that set of definitions. And other than the general question of anything else he has questions or qualms about, or is unhappy about without the Caroline's law, would be this question of the penalty. So let's go there now. Okay, so what's the penalty in the law?
Well, the couple that said any penalties said it, I don't know if they said what you suggested, but they said it was a misdemeanor, but a penalty of $500. And that was in 1998. And so I suggested that seems a little low today, and to raise it. But then that might run into another problem.
Yeah, and so, and again, I concur, it felt $500, so indeed, in $1998, that would be about $1,000 now. When we were doing, for instance, I just dug this up, when we were doing the battery energy storage law, it had a penalty amount of $2,500 for an infraction, and Guy flagged that and said, for administrative violation, this is potentially problematic and may run into Eighth Amendment issues. I don't know what the Eighth Amendment is, to be honest, probably on, I don't know.
Taxation without purpose.
Yeah, I don't know, at any rate. And he said, maybe this should just be called a undefined misdemeanor or something.
Unspecified?
Unspecified misdemeanor. And in the end, that's what the law says. Now, I wasn't involved in the final discussions, because that, at this point, was that I passed the town board. I said, okay, I don't want to deal with the penalty thing. You guys work it out with the guy and do what makes the town board happy. And
So was he concerned with the dollar amount?
he was talking about, he specifically said anything over $1,000 in his view at the time, potentially runs afoul of some, I don't know if it's what it is, due process or fairness or something. And I talked to Mark about today, and he can't resurrect any further thinking than what I have on that. So I'm gonna ask Guy about that, whether it would be fine to say $1,000 in this law, or if that raises concerns for him. The other thing is, it says that every day of an infraction is a new infraction. Whereas this other old battery law was every week. I don't know what, every day, every week, I admit if it's $1,000 a day, that can mount up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Obviously want a disincentive to make people comply. But I also unclear on, in Guy's formulation, if the law doesn't specify a dollar amount, what happens? Do you go to a trial and that sets the amount? So
Eighth Amendment forbids the government from using torture as well as excessive fines and bail to punish people who have broken the law.
Okay, so that it puts her up of excessive fine.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I think that a rapid escalation, again, I don't know why it passed muster in 1999 or whatever, maybe it would still pass muster today, but maybe every day is too rapid an escalation. So I feel the need for his, we could write something and then he could say, no, this is no good, and then we'd rewrite it. And what I would rather do is ask him now, what we should do. And so that's what I propose to do. So what I'm now asking you guys is, I think that pretty much concludes the issues. But if you can think of anything else I ought to ask Guy, because I will write the note probably tomorrow. It is sort of things we want to know.
Well, I think that, I think that the issue about, the complication with distances and zoning and the size of the commercial district, are there any other particular things we should be aware of, or, thinking about in that regard?
Okay, good. Note that. Okay, well, what I would say is if something occurs to you on the drive home, or as you're laying in bed tonight, send it to me, and again, I won't send it out probably till tomorrow afternoon or something, so feel free to forward questions. And so I discussed this with, so that sort of ends that, so I discussed this with Mark sort of in general, because when we did the solar law and the battery law, we basically, Gaia did initially bring some stuff forward like years ago, where he gave us some stuff in Lansing, and then I worked from that, but I wound up relying a lot on NYSERDA stuff and everything, and then he got handed a final law, and I think that's pretty typical. And I always thought that's the way it was supposed to work, and whatever, and maybe it is, that basically we write a law and he does at the end make sure that it's works or tells us what doesn't work. When we were working on the subdivision review law, some feedback came back based on our questions, everything, where it felt like he thought was appropriate and also desired, and actually he wanted to be able to chime in sooner in the process. And I do see the value in that, which is why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
So I asked Mark for a pre-approval also for the mobile park law. So as you and Will are working on that, again, it doesn't make sense to ask him before we've looked at anything, because then we don't even know what question to ask. But as you guys go through it, and I will be going through it too, as I discuss it in here, then I would think that, within our first or second meeting, we should again be drafting him a note with questions to help guide our process, and also will bring him online, so he's not getting sort of, hit with something that he says, whoa, should have done something different, so. That's my plan. That's all I've got. And then once we get this back from Guy, then I think we can finish up on that one pretty quickly. And then, well, maybe we'll start working sort of simultaneously on the mobile home law and the flood damage prevention law. Okay. Oh, the other thing, again, I think I mentioned this in the note. Our law is called like adult use law, and defines adult use as either, adult, what is it, where's the law? An adult use is either an adult entertainment business or adult physical contact establishment. But if you go search for adult use, you get a lot of hits on cannabis and, alcohol and other stuff like that. So I noticed that, again, Lansing just calls it their like adult entertainment ordinance.
Yep.
I would be tempted to call this, you know, adult entertainment law
Mm-hmm.
and, an entertainment business, I think can include, a physical contact establishment. I see no reason to,
Mhm.
and that's what they do in the other laws.
I mean, when you first told me to look into this, without looking into anything first, I thought it was about cannabis.
Yeah,
So,
so, I mean, you know, times are different, right?
Yeah.
So.
So are you saying that cannabis would be included in here, or would not? be?
No, I think it's not included here, but it's confusing because when people talk about adult use today, it often has to do with cannabis dispensaries.
No, but
and-
even if it's called an adult entertainment establishment, does that?
I don't think that would cover cannabis, no.
By whose definition? I mean, I guess my question is, if we don't want it to include cannabis, do we have to specify that in the law?
I don't think we'll need, because if we, what they used to do is they define adult entertainment businesses and as you read through, all of them have some sort of sexual
Okay,
connotation to them.
okay,
So what they do is all of them have to have something that touches on these specified anatomical areas and specified anatomical activities.
okay.
And if you're a bookstore, you have to have, you know, some number of books that deal with that, then you're an adult bookstore covered by this. If you only have one, if like 5% of your books are about that way, you would not be covered by the law. It says predominant here,
Okay.
Lansing's law says 50% or something like that.
50%, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so I think cannabis and for the same reason, beverage place would be excluded.
Just like massage parlors, like if you're a spa, you're not included because other things happen there too, normal spa things.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think, and that's where I think the part of the difference, it tends to be a little bit carefully crafted because it has to be the fact that again, sex is part of what's going on there,
Right.
you know. I will, you know, again, you get down rabbit holes when you're looking at stuff, so there was I think it might have been, I don't know if it was brought up in this document or something else, maybe it was in the Dark State document, but New York City's law talked about, the place had to be adult use, it also had essentially be restricted to 18 and up. And so there was a place with nude dancing that decided to allow minors. They had to be accompanied by a parent, and the parent and the child would both sign a form saying, it's fine, I'm not gonna be bothered by this. And they tried to skirt New York City's law based on that. A judge shot it down saying, you are so obviously trying to skirt the law with this, that's not gonna fly. But, you know, in other words, yes, definitions are important.
Yeah.
So. I'm thinking we should adjourn the meeting.
Okay.
All right, great,
Good.
thanks, Anna, for all your looking into things and about. We'll move on from here. Okay, good night, Michelle.
Right,
You can tell
Thanks.
yeah, and if, you know, tell the board, you know, yeah, we're happy, we'll definitely move on to I definitely think the flood zone law needs some work, so I'm very
Okay.
happy to do that.
all right. Okay, see you later.
But
Yeah.
Bye.
where
Bye.
can we find that law?
Okay, so, if you go to the town website, one of the tabs on the right, second to the right, or somewhere there, one of those says documents. Under documents, it says laws.
Okay.
And click on that, and then, they're categorized, but that will be a land use law, and so there's a whole section of it. Okay, so now, let's stop recording.